June 30th, 1944. 2 in the morning. Saipan, the Mariana Islands. Second Lieutenant Dale Haberman sits in the cockpit of a massive black aircraft, circling at 8,000 feet above the jungle. His radar operator, Lieutenant Ray Mooney, watches a green scope in the rear compartment. For 3 hours, they have seen nothing but empty sky. Then, Mooney's voice crackles through the intercom. Contact. Bogey at 6 miles. Bearing 040. Closing fast. Haberman banks toward the target. This is the moment they have trained 18 months for. The first operational night interception by America's secret weapon. The aircraft the Japanese will soon call the Nightmare. The aircraft Haberman flies has no official nickname yet. The crews call it the Black Widow. 66 feet of wingspan, twin engines, twin tail booms, a belly packed with 4 20mm cannons. And in the nose, something no other American fighter carries. Radar. Not a crude warning device, but a sophisticated tracking system that can find an enemy aircraft in complete darkness from 5 miles away. Tonight, over Saipan, that radar is about to prove its worth. Mooney calls out ranges. 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles. Haberman still sees nothing but black sky. Then, at 1 mile, a shadow crosses the stars ahead. The hunt is almost over. Haberman makes a decision that will define Black Widow tactics for the rest of the war. Instead of attacking head-on, he lets the enemy aircraft pass directly overhead. A Japanese Betty bomber, twin engines growling, heading toward American positions on Saipan. Haberman executes a perfect 180-degree turn and slides into position behind the bomber. 700 feet. He can see the exhaust flames from both engines now. The Betty's rear gunner never sees him coming. Haberman squeezes the trigger. 4 cannons roar. 20mm shells tear through the bomber's fuselage. The Betty explodes in a ball of orange fire and tumbles into the Pacific. America's first purpose-built night fighter has just scored its first kill. To understand why this moment matters, you need to understand what American troops in the Pacific had endured for 2 years. Every night, from Guadalcanal to New Guinea to the Marianas, Japanese aircraft appeared over American bases after midnight. They flew low, they flew slow, and they made a very specific sound. American soldiers called them Washing Machine Charlie. The engines were deliberately unsynchronized, creating a rhythmic rattling noise that echoed across the jungle for hours. The psychological warfare was devastating. Sleep became impossible, exhaustion mounted, morale collapsed. Men cracked under the constant strain of waiting for bombs that might or might not fall. The Japanese knew exactly what they were doing with these night harassment raids. The raiders rarely caused significant damage. A few bombs dropped randomly, some flares to light up American positions, occasional strafing runs. But the real weapon was fear and sleep deprivation, night after night after night. American commanders tried everything to stop them. Searchlights that only revealed their own positions to the enemy. Anti-aircraft guns that wasted thousands of rounds shooting at shadows. Single-engine fighters that burned fuel circling blindly in the dark. Finding nothing. Nothing worked. The Americans had no aircraft designed to fight at night. No radar small enough to fit in a fighter cockpit. No answer to Washing Machine Charlie. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away in London, a British innovation was changing everything about night combat. The Royal Air Force had developed airborne interception radar during the Blitz, mounting crude sets in modified Bristol Blenheims and Beaufighters. These night fighters began taking a toll on German bombers over England. American military observers watched closely and took detailed notes. The technology was primitive, but the concept was revolutionary. An aircraft that could find its prey in total darkness, close to killing range, and destroy it before the enemy ever knew it was there. In October 1940, the Army Air Corps issued a specification for something unprecedented: a purpose-built night fighter. The contract went to Northrop Corporation in Hawthorne, California. The designer was Jack Northrop himself, an aviation visionary who had already pioneered flying wing concepts. His team faced an impossible list of requirements. The aircraft needed to carry heavy armament for destroying bombers, enough fuel for long patrols lasting hours, the enormous weight of airborne radar equipment, a crew of 3 to operate everything, speed to catch enemy bombers and maneuverability to engage them at close range. And it had to do all of this in total darkness. No existing fighter design could satisfy all these demands simultaneously. Northrop started from scratch with a clean sheet of paper. What emerged was unlike anything the Army Air Corps had ever seen. The XP-61 made its first flight on May 26, 1942. Test pilot Vance Breeze lifted the massive black aircraft off the runway at Hawthorne and immediately knew they had created something special. The unconventional twin-boom design gave pilots unprecedented visibility for night operations. The tricycle landing gear made night landings far safer than conventional tail draggers. Two Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines, each generating over 2,000 horsepower, pushed the aircraft past 360 miles per hour. For a machine weighing over 30,000 pounds fully loaded, it handled like a dream. The armament was terrifying by any standard of the time. 4 Hispano M2 20mm cannons mounted in the belly, firing forward beneath the crew compartment. Each cannon spat explosive shells at a rate of 600 rounds per minute. Combined, they could tear an enemy bomber apart in a 2-second burst. Above the fuselage sat a remote-controlled turret with 450 caliber machine guns, giving the Black Widow the firepower of a medium bomber. The guns could traverse 360 degrees and elevate to engage targets above, below, or to either side. No night fighter in any air force anywhere in the world carried this much destruction, but the turret became one of the Black Widow's most controversial features. It was the same General Electric turret used in the top forward position of the B-29 Superfortress, and the B-29 had absolute production priority over everything else in the Army Air Forces. Many P-61s arrived at their squadrons without turrets installed because every available unit went to Boeing's bomber assembly lines. Those aircraft that did receive turrets discovered another problem. When the turret traversed during flight, it created severe buffeting that affected aircraft handling. Some squadrons removed the turrets entirely and installed extra fuel tanks in the empty space. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron found a creative solution to the turret problem that other units would eventually copy. Their armorers welded the turret in a fixed forward-firing position, adding 4 more heavy machine guns to the pilot's firepower without the buffeting issues. The 425th Night Fighter Squadron in Europe took a different approach, moving the radar operator from his isolated rear compartment into the vacant gunner's seat directly behind the pilot. This improved crew coordination dramatically, allowing pilot and radar operator to communicate with gestures and shared instruments rather than relying solely on the intercom. But the real revolution sat in the aircraft's nose. The Western Electric SCR-720 airborne interception radar was the most advanced system of its kind in 1943. Operating on a wavelength of 9.1 centimeters, it could detect aircraft at ranges up to 6 miles. The antenna rotated mechanically inside a distinctive radar dome, scanning 75 degrees left and right of the aircraft's nose. A skilled radar operator could track multiple targets simultaneously, calculating range, bearing, and closure rate in his head. The system required constant adjustment and interpretation, turning radar operation into an art form as much as a science. Operators spent months learning to read the green phosphorescent glow of the scope. The Black Widow crew operated as a tightly coordinated team of 3 men who trusted each other with their lives. The pilot sat in the front compartment, responsible for flying the aircraft and firing the main armament when targets came into visual range. Behind and above him, the gunner controlled the dorsal turret through an innovative remote sighting system. In the rear compartment, separated by nearly 20 feet of aircraft, the radar operator hunched over his scope in near total darkness. Communication flowed constantly through the intercom. The radar operator guided the pilot toward the target with bearing and range calls. The pilot called out visual contact. The gunner watched for threats from other directions. Training a Black Widow crew took nearly a year of intensive preparation. Pilots learned instrument flying to standards far beyond normal requirements, since they would spend entire missions in complete darkness with no visual references. Radar operators attended specialized schools studying the physics of electromagnetic radiation, the quirks of SCR-720 maintenance, and the interpretation of radar returns that could distinguish a bomber from a rain squall or a flock of birds. Gunners practiced tracking targets they could not see, relying solely on data fed from the radar operator. The crews lived together, trained together, flew together. By the time they reached combat, they operated as a single organism with 3 sets of eyes. Production deliveries began in October 1943, but the Black Widow would not reach combat for another 8 months. The delay frustrated everyone from theater commanders to the crews themselves, who were eager to prove their aircraft. Part of the problem was the complexity of the aircraft and its systems. Part was the enormous distance to Pacific bases and shipping priorities. Part was the simple reality that night fighting remained a secondary priority, while daylight air superiority was still being contested over Japanese-held territory. Meanwhile, washing machine. Charlie kept coming every night. American troops kept losing sleep. The Japanese kept winning the psychological war. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron reached Saipan in June 1944, just as the island invasion began. They had exactly 4 operational aircraft and not nearly enough spare parts. Maintenance was a nightmare in the tropical conditions. The humidity corroded electronics designed for temperate climates. Spare parts arrived sporadically if they arrived at all. The SCR-720 radar proved temperamental in the heat, requiring constant recalibration that sometimes took hours. Ground crews worked around the clock, keeping the Black Widows operational. On June 25, 1944, the first combat patrol launched into the Pacific night. They found nothing. Then came June 30th and Dale Haberman's historic interception of that Betty bomber. The effect on American ground troops was immediate and profound. Word spread across Saipan within hours. The night hunters had arrived. No more washing machine Charlie keeping them awake. Japanese aircraft losses over the next weeks mounted steadily as Black Widows found and destroyed raiders that had once operated with impunity. By August, night raids on Saipan had virtually ceased. The same pattern repeated at base after base across the Pacific. Wherever Black Widows arrived, washing machine Charlie stopped coming. The psychological tables had turned completely. Now it was Japanese pilots who feared the night. The crews developed tactics that made the P-61 even more lethal than its designers had imagined. They discovered that attacking from below and behind placed their black-painted aircraft against the dark ocean, where it was virtually invisible to enemy gunners looking for threats. They learned that destroying the lead bomber in a Japanese formation caused the rest to panic and jettison their bombs over open water, unable to complete their missions. One well-placed kill could neutralize an entire raid before a single bomb fell on American troops. They perfected the art of closing to point-blank range before firing. The 420mm cannons were devastating at such distances. A single, well-aimed burst could tear a bomber apart. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron arrived in the Southwest Pacific in late 1944 under the command of a pilot who would become legendary. Major Carroll C. Smith was already known among night fighter pilots as aggressive, technically brilliant, and absolutely confident in his aircraft and crews. He developed tactics that transformed the Black Widow from a defensive interceptor into an offensive hunter that went looking for prey. Instead of waiting for enemy aircraft to come to them, Smith's crews patrolled Japanese airfields at night, catching bombers on takeoff and landing when they were most vulnerable. They stalked convoy routes where Japanese aircraft flew regular supply missions. If you want to see how Major Smith became the highest-scoring night fighter ace of the entire war, hit that subscribe button and like this video. It really helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered. 70% of viewers watching right now are not subscribed, but the algorithm favors channels with engaged audiences who interact with content. If you are enjoying this story about the Black Widow and its extraordinary cruise, joining the community makes a real difference. Now, back to Major Carol Smith and the single night that made aviation history over the Philippines. December 29, 1944, Mindoro, Philippines. Japanese forces are attempting a desperate counterattack against the recent American invasion of the island. Enemy bombers have been striking Mindoro every night, and tonight is no exception. Major Smith takes off in his Black Widow, nicknamed Time's a Wastin', with radar operator Lieutenant Philip Porter watching the scope. They climb to 8,000 feet and begin their patrol over San Jose Bay. The night is clear with stars blazing overhead. Somewhere out there, Japanese bombers are hunting American ships in the anchorage below. Smith intends to find them first. Porter picks up the first contact at 6 miles. A twin-engine aircraft heading south toward the American anchorage at high speed. Smith pushes the throttles forward and begins the intercept. At 1 mile, he picks up the visual against the stars. A Mitsubishi Key 21 Sally bomber, olive drab paint barely visible against the black sky. Smith slides into position 200 yards behind and slightly below where no gunner can see him. He can see the rear gunner's station, clearly silhouetted against the night. The gunner never turns around. 4 cannons fire. The Sally disintegrates in a ball of flame. Burning debris tumbles toward the Philippine jungle far below. Kill number 1. They have barely resumed patrol when Porter calls another contact on his scope. This time it is a smaller aircraft, single engine, moving fast across the sky. A fighter or reconnaissance plane. Smith is skeptical that he can catch a nimble fighter with his heavy Black Widow, but Porter insists the geometry is favorable for an intercept. Smith trusts his radar operator completely. They begin the intercept from a high rear quarter, using altitude advantage to build speed in a dive. The target grows larger in the windscreen. A Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, the nimble Japanese army fighter. Smith fires from 300 yards. The Oscar explodes instantly. Kill number 2 in less than 20 minutes of patrol. The next 2 hours test everything Smith and Porter have learned about night fighting in their months of combat together. They intercept and destroy a Kawasaki Ki 48 Lily light bomber at low altitude, chasing it through valleys with wingtips barely clearing the jungle canopy on either side. The pursuit lasts several terrifying minutes before Smith gets a clear shot. Then comes the most difficult engagement of the night. Another Oscar, this one piloted by someone who clearly knows he is being hunted and refuses to die easily. The Japanese pilot begins violent evasive maneuvers the moment Smith closes within visual range. The chase lasts almost 10 minutes through the black Philippine sky. The Oscar rolls, dives, executes climbing turns that should have shaken any pursuer. Smith matches every movement, his heavy Black Widow somehow staying with the nimble fighter through maneuvers that seemed impossible for such a large aircraft. He fires 3 times, each burst narrowly missing as the Oscar snaps into another evasive turn at the last instant. Ammunition is running low, fuel gauge dropping steadily. Porter keeps calling ranges and bearings, keeping Smith oriented as the dogfight weaves across the darkness. Finally, the Oscar pilot makes a mistake that costs him everything. A climbing turn that bleeds too much energy at the wrong moment. Smith is waiting in the perfect position. The cannons roar one final time. The Oscar comes apart in mid-air, pieces tumbling away into the night. 4 kills in one night. No night fighter pilot in any Air Force had ever achieved this in a single mission. Carol Smith had just rewritten the record books. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron would score 12 kills in the 13 nights following December 27th. The Japanese night air offensive against Mindoro was broken by a handful of Black Widows hunting in the darkness. Meanwhile, half a world away in Europe, Black Widows were proving themselves against a very different and more sophisticated enemy. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron arrived in England in February 1944. The first American night fighter unit in the European theatre. But they arrived without their aircraft. The P-61s were still being shipped across the Atlantic, victims of production delays and competing priorities for cargo space. When the Black Widows finally reached England in late May, the crews faced an unexpected obstacle. American generals, particularly those who admired British aircraft, questioned whether the P-61 was fast enough to fight German night fighters. They suggested equipping American squadrons with the legendary de Havilland Mosquito instead. The controversy led to one of the most disputed events of the Air War. On July 5, 1944, a carefully prepared P-61 from the 422nd went head-to-head against a Mosquito Mark 17 flown by RAF pilots at Herne Airfield in England. The American aircraft had been optimized for maximum performance, its crew determined to prove the Black Widow's worth in fair competition. According to the official report from the 422nd Squadron historian, the P-61 proved faster at all tested altitudes, outturned the Mosquito by a wide margin, and far surpassed it in rate of climb. The skeptical generals were convinced the Black Widow would stay in American hands. But controversy lingered for decades after the war. Some historians believe the RAF crew had been ordered to lose deliberately, to preserve Mosquitoes for British use rather than diverting production to American squadrons. Lieutenant Colonel Winston Kratz, who had bet $500 that the Mosquito would win, paid off the bet but never accepted the result. He claimed until his dying day that the British had deliberately thrown the competition, saying the RAF pilots were lying like troopers about their aircraft's true performance. The truth remains disputed, but the outcome changed nothing. The Black Widow went to war. Their introduction to combat came not against German bombers, but against Hitler's terror weapon that was falling on London with terrifying regularity. The V-1 flying bomb, pulse jet engines screaming, these pilotless cruise missiles streaked toward London at over 400 miles per hour, far faster than any interceptor could chase from behind. They flew at altitudes between 1,000 and 4,000 feet, following a preset course until their fuel ran out and they dove into whatever happened to be below. Thousands of British civilians had already died. The Royal Air Force was overwhelmed trying to stop them. On July 15, 1944, Lieutenant Herman Ernst attempted the first American 5-1 interception. He closed on the flying bomb without difficulty, the radar working perfectly in the clear European air. But when he fired, his 20mm shells struck the V-1's thin plastic rear cone and passed straight through without detonating. The flying bomb continued toward London. Ernst was furious at the failure. The next night he tried again, this time aiming for the fuel tank in the center section rather than the engine. The V-1 exploded so close that the blast nearly flipped his Black Widow inverted. Ernst regained control with just 400 feet to spare. First V-1 kill by an American aircraft. The European Black Widows faced challenges unknown to their Pacific counterparts hunting Washing Machine Charlie. German night fighters were far more sophisticated than Japanese harassment aircraft flying antiquated bombers. The Luftwaffe flew Messerschmitt Bf-100s and Junkers Ju-88s equipped with their own radar systems, experienced crews who had been fighting night battles for years, and heavy armament that could destroy a Black Widow with a single, well-aimed burst. Engagements became duels between equals. Radar operator against radar operator, pilot against pilot. The Black Widow's superior speed and firepower provided an edge, but German pilots were cunning and disciplined. Kills came hard. The winter of 1944 brought the Battle of the Bulge, a near catastrophe for the 422nd. Spare parts had been chronically short for months as production priorities favored other aircraft types. Now, with German forces advancing through the Ardennes and weather-grounding most daylight aircraft, the squadron found itself with just 4 operational Black Widows to cover hundreds of miles of front line. Mechanics performed miracles, cannibalizing wrecked aircraft, fabricating parts from whatever materials they could scavenge in the frozen Belgian countryside. The Black Widows kept flying. They flew 35 sorties in January alone, sometimes launching 3 missions per night per aircraft. On March 2nd, 1945, Herman Ernst and his radar operator Edward Kopsel achieved something extraordinary in the skies over Western Germany. They were patrolling when ground control vectored them toward a contact heading east at low altitude. Ernst closed to 400 feet on a Messerschmitt Bf 110 before opening fire. His 20mm shells walked across the German aircraft's fuselage. The Bf 110 snapped violently to the right and fell away into the darkness, trailing flames. Within the hour, they had found and killed 2 more aircraft. A pair of Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers attempting to sneak back to their base. 3 kills in one night. Ernst and Kopsel became aces. The last aerial victories of World War II belonged to a Black Widow. August 14th and 15th, 1945. Japan has announced its intention to surrender, but scattered military units across the Pacific have not yet received the order to cease hostilities. Over Okinawa, Lieutenant Lee Kendall and radar operator Lieutenant John Shearer patrol in their Black Widow, nicknamed Lady in the Dark. Shortly after midnight on August 15th, they pick up a contact heading toward American positions, a Nakajima Key 43 Oscar. Kendall begins the intercept. What follows is unlike any engagement in Black Widow history, or perhaps any night fighter engagement of the war. The Japanese pilot clearly sees the Black Widow closing on his tail. Instead of running or fighting, he makes a desperate decision and dives toward the ocean. Kendall follows him down through the darkness. The Oscar levels off just feet above the waves, its propeller nearly touching the water, flying lower than any sane pilot would attempt at night. Kendall matches the altitude, pushing the Black Widow lower than its crews had ever flown in combat. For several minutes, the 2 aircraft race across the moonlit Philippine Sea at wave-top height. Kendall never fires a shot. He never has to. The Oscar pilot attempts an evasive turn and misjudges his altitude by inches. His wingtip catches a wave. The aircraft cartwheels across the water and explodes. The following night, Lady in the Dark is airborne again when Shearer picks up another contact on his radar scope. A Nakajima Key 44 Tojo fighter heading south toward American positions that still need protection despite the announced surrender. Kendall closes for the interception, but this pilot is even more skilled than the Oscar pilot from the previous night. The Tojo executes a series of violent maneuvers that repeatedly break radar lock. Shearer struggles to reacquire the target each time it disappears from his scope. Kendall catches glimpses of the fighter in the darkness, but cannot get a clear shot for his cannons. Finally, the Tojo disappears completely into the night. Kendall circles the area for several minutes, searching for any sign of the Japanese fighter, but Shearer's scope shows nothing but empty sky. Kendall returns to base, disappointed at losing his quarry. The next morning, American ground troops on a nearby island report finding the wreckage of a Ki-44 in the jungle. The pilot had flown into a hillside while evading the Black Widow he could not see. Lady in the Dark had forced another enemy aircraft into the ground without firing a shot. These were the final aerial victories of World War II. The war ended with an extraordinary record for the P-61 Black Widow. 127 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat across the Pacific and European theaters. 18 V-1 flying bombs shot down over England before they could reach London. An operational loss rate of just 0.5%, the lowest of any American fighter type in the war. Only 4 Black Widows were ever confirmed lost to enemy action during the entire conflict. The aircraft that critics had called too big, too heavy, too complex had proven itself the most effective night fighter of World War II. Its crews had ended the reign of washing machine, Charlie forever. Among those who flew the Black Widow was a young radar operator who would become one of America's most celebrated literary figures. James Dickey flew 38 missions over the Pacific with the 418th Night Fighter Squadron. He was awarded 5 Bronze Stars for his service-hunting Japanese aircraft through the darkness. Decades later, Dickey would write Deliverance, the novel that became one of the most iconic American films of the 1970s. But he never forgot the nights spent hunched over a radar scope in a Black Widow, guiding his pilot through darkness toward an enemy he could not see. The experience shaped his understanding of violence and fear. The psychological impact of the Black Widow extended far beyond its impressive kill count. Japanese aircrew documents captured after the war revealed the terror the aircraft inspired among pilots ordered to fly night missions. They reported seeing nothing but blackness until cannons opened fire from impossible range. The matte black paint absorbed searchlight beams, making the aircraft virtually invisible even when illuminated directly. Radio intercepts recorded frantic warnings between Japanese pilots. The Night Devil is hunting. Turn back. Turn back. Morale among Japanese night harassment units collapsed completely. By early 1945, Washing Machine Charlie had become nothing but a memory. British prisoners of war who witnessed a Black Widow during the famous Cabanatuan POW camp rescue raid in January 1945 provided an unexpected testament to the aircraft's terrifying appearance, even to friendly observers. As American Rangers approached the prison camp in the Philippines, a Black Widow flew low overhead, deliberately backfiring its engines and trailing black exhaust smoke to distract Japanese guards from the approaching rescue force. The British prisoners, captured at Singapore years earlier and having no knowledge of American aircraft development, believed the Germans had won the war. No one but the Luftwaffe, they thought, could have fielded such a malevolent machine. The Black Widow remained in service long after the war ended because jet fighters proved too unreliable for sustained night operations in all weather conditions. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and other early jets lacked the range and endurance that night patrol required. The last operational P-61 left Japan in May 1950, nearly a decade after the first prototype flew at Hawthorne. Modified reconnaissance versions designated F-15 Reporter conducted critical mapping missions across the Pacific, photographing islands and documenting the route of the Bataan Death March for war crimes investigators gathering evidence. The Black Widow also contributed to scientific research that would save countless civilian lives. In 1946, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics began the Thunderstorm Project, an ambitious effort to understand the violent weather that killed pilots and passengers every year. P-61s were chosen for this dangerous work because they could survive conditions that would tear apart lighter aircraft. Flying directly into thunderstorms, the Black Widows gathered data on turbulence, wind shear, and lightning that transformed weather forecasting and made commercial aviation immeasurably safer. The aircraft, that had been designed to fight in darkness, spent its final military years photographing in daylight. By 1952, the last Black Widows had been retired from all military service, replaced by jet interceptors that could fly faster, but never matched the P-61's combination of range, firepower, and crew coordination. Most of the 742 aircraft built were scrapped. Their aluminum melted down for civilian use. A few lingered at remote bases, forgotten relics of a war that seemed distant even then. The night fighters that had terrorized Japanese bomber crews vanished almost without trace. Today, only 4 complete P-61 Black Widows survive anywhere in the world. 2 sit in museums where visitors can see them up close and marvel at their massive size. 1 rusts forgotten in a traffic circle in China, an unlikely monument to a war few there remember. 1 is being painstakingly restored from wreckage, recovered from a New Guinea jungle where it crashed during a combat mission more than 80 years ago. The aircraft that terrified Japanese pilots and protected American soldiers through the darkest nights of the Pacific War has nearly vanished from history. Most people have never heard of it. The name Black Widow was not officially sanctioned by the Army Air Forces, but emerged from the crews themselves who flew the aircraft into combat. They saw something in the massive, matte black machine with its bulbous radar nose and twin tail booms that reminded them of the deadly Spider. Like its namesake, the P-61 was patient, lurking in darkness, waiting for prey to stumble into its web of radar beams. Like the Spider, it struck with sudden and lethal precision. The crews painted widow spiders on their aircraft noses, embraced the nickname that captured what they did. They were not defensive interceptors. They were hunters, and the night was their web. Every modern night-fighting aircraft, from Cold War interceptors to 21st century stealth fighters, descends conceptually from what the Black Widow proved was possible. The idea that an aircraft could find and destroy enemies in complete darkness using radar and crew coordination began here in the Pacific skies of 1944. The tactics developed by Black Widow crews, the training methods, the integration of radar into combat operations, all of this became the foundation for everything that followed. When a modern fighter pilot locks onto a target with radar, he is using techniques refined over Saipan and Mindoro and Belgium. Dale Haberman, the pilot who scored the first Black Widow kill over Saipan, survived the war and returned to civilian life. So did his radar operator, Ray Mooney. They remained friends for the rest of their lives, bound by that night in June 1944, when they proved what the Black Widow could do. Major Carol Smith lived until 2003, still telling stories about the Philippines to anyone who would listen. His 4 kills in one night remain the single mission record for an American night fighter pilot, a record that will never be broken. Herman Ernst and Edward Kopsel became legends in the 422nd, and somewhere in the darkness over Saipan, in the summer of 1944, an American soldier finally got a full night's sleep for the first time in months. No rattling engines disturbed his rest, no flares lit up his position, no bombs fell randomly into the jungle around him. Above him, invisible against the black sky, a massive aircraft circled on silent wings, watching, waiting, hunting anything that dared enter its domain. Washing machine. Charlie would not come tonight. The Nightmare was on patrol. The P-61 Black Widow had arrived, and the night belonged to America at last.